Looking beyond the excellent Pelagos Fixed, the vast majority of Tudor's big releases over the past few years have been members of the incredibly popular Black Bay collection. That is up until recently when we saw Tudor announce a new modern version of the Ranger as a follow-up to the previous Heritage Ranger that was quietly discontinued in 2020. And in this video, we're gonna take a closer look at this new Ranger and really go through everything you need to know before buying. So this is going to be broken up into 5 different parts. We'll begin with a brief history on the model family, then move into what remains the same, then move into some updated dimensions and the bracelet and some differences, followed up with the in-house caliber, the MT5402, and then at the end, talk about whether you should buy or not buy, and who is this watch ultimately for. Let's jump into it. So this video is going to be solely based on the Ranger, but if you want more things Tudor, especially if you want to get into the Black Bay collection, we have a definitive guide looking at every Black Bay reference, going into the history, talking about everything since its genesis in 2012, including the original Heritage model, the Chrono, the GMT, the 58s, and much more. I'll have a link to that down in the description down below if you want more things Tudor, especially the Black Bay. So since we've never covered this model family in depth on the channel before, let's start with a very brief history leading up to the release of this new Tudor Ranger. Now to begin, it's important to note that the history of the Tudor Ranger is a bit murkier compared to some other models from the brand, with the reason being that Tudor's original Ranger was itself a variant of the regular Oyster Prince collection from the brand, housed in the same 34mm case. While the Oyster Prince dates back to 1952, the earliest Ranger signed Tudor Oyster Prince watches date back to the early 1960s, with the model being officially introduced in the catalog in 1969, at least according to Tudor. Tudor is big on sharing the history of the British North Greenland Expedition, the BNGE, when discussing this model family, but it's important to note that the brave members of that 1952 expedition wore a standard Oyster Prince model, as opposed to the true Ranger signed watches, making the association perhaps a little bit of a stretch. But in terms of its position in the collection, the Ranger acted as Tudor's answer to the Rolex Explorer introduced in 1953, pairing loomed Arabic numerals at 12, 3, 6, and 9 with geometric indices elsewhere in a smaller Oyster Prince case compared to the original Explorer's 36mm case. Just as the snowflake handset has come to define Tudor's take on the Submariner, the shovel hand that has come to be known as the Ranger hand is a key design differentiator. The original Ranger was in production until 1988 with a variety of date, no date, automatic, and manual options throughout the decades. After years of being dormant, the Heritage Ranger came back into the fold in 2014 following the success of the Black Bay family launched a couple years earlier. The first modern Ranger was housed in a 41mm case, had a red seconds hand, smiley dial text, and was equipped with the ubiquitous ETA 2824. And while the Heritage Ranger still has some fans, the watch never really took off to any meaningful degree, leaving Tudor to concentrate on producing more Black Bay variants and ultimately discontinuing the Ranger in 2020. However, this discontinuation was short-lived, and after a quick regroup, we were surprised with the new Ranger in July of this year with a few key updates that I think make this a very different animal compared to the previous model. But before we talk about what's new with this watch, let's take a moment to recap what really remains the same. At least in terms of its basic visual design, the new Ranger looks very similar to the Heritage Ranger of a few years back, offering the same general case shape, fixed steel bezel, 100 meters of water resistance, optional Oyster style bracelet, and of course the distinctive Ranger hour hand. The scheme of the case and bracelet finishing is similar as well, with this new variant leaning into primarily satin brushing almost everywhere you look. The new dial loses the Tudor Rose logo in favor of Tudor's modern shield, trades the smiley text from the ETA-powered Tudors for the simple Ranger text, and opts for a red tip seconds hand, as opposed to the full red of the older model. The lume, while tinted just a bit for a vintage feel, it glows adequately but not exceptionally, as is the usual case for things within the Black Bay collection, and the hue of the lume is more yellow-green than true faux lume that we see across the industry. There is no date to speak of, a feature that I do appreciate in this instance given its positioning as a field-oriented watch. And as a whole, This dial still feels very clean, it's legible, and in keeping with this model family's history, but it is now housed within a much more wearable case and upgraded bracelet. Now, one key aspect that held the Heritage Ranger of 2014 back was the sizing. Now, the 41mm wide case wore larger despite its relatively compact 48mm lug to lug, in part due to the narrow bezel design and additional real estate occupied by the dial. With the new Ranger, Tudor has downsized the watch to 39mm, a jump that we have seen in the past with the original Heritage Black Bay and the 58. As it did for the Black Bay, the 39mm diameter changes the wearing experience while also opening up the model family to a broader set of wrist sizes on the smaller end of the spectrum. The lug to lug remains close to the same as its predecessor at 47.7mm compared to the 48mm when measuring with calipers, but the wearing experience is more compact, a factor that is only enhanced by the reasonable thickness of 11mm. In totality though, the watch wears like a true 40mm as the thin bezel gives way to the dial appearing larger, unlike something like the 58, which will have the benefit of the rotating bezel to break down the case elements to make it optically wear smaller or more true to size. By opting for this 39mm case size, Tudor is also filling the mold abandoned by Rolex, who shifted the Explorer back to its original 36mm diameter last year, so another important point. And for those who were put off by that change, the new Tudor Ranger presents a pretty enticing option at less than half the price, with an unquestionable similar approach right down to the bracelet, which is another big update with this new model. Where the 2014 Ranger offered a straight-ended oyster-style bracelet, which was polarizing, and then a traditional folding clasp, the newest Ranger leans into a fitted oyster bracelet in a smaller 20mm size, being complete with one of Tudor's best modern innovations, the T-Fit clasp for micro-adjustment without the use of tools. While perhaps not quite as refined as the Rolex Glide Lock system, Tudor's T-Fit still works impressively well in practice, allowing for around 8mm of adjustment by simply pulling the bracelet away from the clasp to form a T, and then sliding it tighter or looser to your own liking. It's an exceptional bracelet that I'd argue is class leading in this $3,000 price point, while also looking the part in terms of matching this model family's history. For anyone who doesn't want this bracelet, there's also a hybrid leather and rubber strap and nylon pull-through straps to consider, and although my preference would be going for the bracelet, I think the strap option that you get from Tudor, and also factoring in the price, will drop below $3,000, and the many third-party options that will be available to you, I think there is more to consider here than usual. The other biggest change with this new Ranger, and arguably its most notable, is with the movement. Now, the previous version opted for an ETA 2824, one of the most proven, dependable, and ubiquitous third-party options on the entire market, but nothing terribly sexy or impressive in the specs department, especially when you factor in the retail price of that watch being around $2,800 to $2,900. Of course, much has changed for Tudor since 2014 and the release of that former Ranger, and the brand now offers an impressive range of manufacturer calibers throughout the majority of its sports watch collection, with the new Ranger here utilizing the MT5402 that is also housed within the Black Bay 58. While not known for its finishing and hidden behind a screw-down case back in this instance, the MT5402 released along with the Black Bay 58 in 2018 is Tudor's smaller automatic in-house caliber, equipped with 70 hours of power reserve while beating away at a Swiss standard 4 Hz 28,800 vibrations per hour beat rate, and offers a COSC certification, a variable inertia balance, and a silicone balance spring to reduce the harmful effects of magnetism on the movement. Compared to the ETA 2824's quoted power reserve of 38 hours and its standard metallic escapement, the MT5402 is a big upgrade and probably is one of the biggest arguments for this new Ranger, as it is currently the most affordable option at retail to get into these MT family of movements, with prices starting around $2,725 for the strap options and then moving up to $3,050 for the bracelet option, essentially staying right in alignment on the price compared to the previous ETA powered version. Speaking anecdotally to the accuracy of this particular example, the Ranger here kept time between -1 to +2 seconds a day when testing across 5 different positions, so well within cost parameters. But now let's talk about the final point here, and that's ultimately, should you buy the Ranger or should you not buy the Ranger? Who is this watch for? Some general pros and cons associated with this watch. Now, starting with some cons, just some things that I think jump out and people were mentioning quite frequently when this thing was released. I think first, one people were saying was just the idea of this watch being kind of maybe boring or basic in terms of its looks. That, to me, I don't think holds much weight, just because, and I don't think really has much of a stance, because this is more of a field explorer style watch. That is part of the format, so I don't want to put this watch down to that degree because I just don't really think that's a valid point. I actually like the design of this watch, and also watches similar if you're looking at the likes of like the Longines Spirits of the world, Hamilton Khaki Fields, Omega Seamaster Railmasters, and 556s. So this is very much in my lane already, but I have a natural bias towards these style of watches. The other point that people mentioned was the printed dial, and to me, I think this is a very fair point. When looking at this dial, it does appear flat. I think this is maybe part of that description when maybe people are saying that this is a little bit of a boring dial. This is maybe what they're meaning. It just does have this one-dimensional type of approach when looking at it that I think some raised markers would definitely help. I know when looking at something like the Black Bay 36, this does add some three-dimensionality to the overall just presentation, and I think that goes a long way in allowing the watch just to appear a little bit more expensive. The other point around lume, I do think two things here. One is the lume is fine in terms of just a general standard, but in terms of Tudor standard, I would say it's a little bit below average for their norm. If you look at something from the Black Bay collection or even like a Black Bay 36, I do think this falls behind that. The other point that I would mention is the lume does have a slightly different shade than what I was expecting when seeing the press photos. It almost has this yellow-green type of tint to it, not the traditional faux age type of lume that we're accustomed to seeing across the industry. So that's one other thing that I'll mention. And I think the other point is there are many watches that are in the lane of what the Ranger is going for. I think there's some cool history here. There's also, of course, the Rolex affiliation, which many people are going to latch onto, and I think the movement is going to allow this one to be really interestingly positioned. But as I mentioned earlier, you're talking about those Hamiltons, you're talking about the Zins well below it, Longines Spirit now kind of getting closer to this with very similar specifications. Then above it, you have Omega Seamaster, Railmaster, IWC with their new Mark 20, and then of course Rolex and Tudor within its own catalog has other watches to maybe consider with some of those heritage Black Bay models like the Black Bay 36. But now let's talk about some pros and then ultimately talk about who this watch is, I think, best suited for. Now, to begin here with things that I like the most about this watch, I think it falls in a really interesting price range for Tudor especially. Now, this is introducing the new MT movements, which I think is another point why this watch is so interesting and also I think such a kind of cool game changer for Tudor. This is starting to get under $3,000 to get an MT movement. So this is pretty much sustained the price of the previous Ranger while still incorporating their new manufacturer calibers. So 70-hour power reserve, COSC certification, really nice to see that. I think the sizing is also going to be probably a better choice for Tudor for a couple of reasons. There is, of course, the now removal of the 39mm Explorer 214-270. This now can kind of shift in that position as an alternative. And if you were longing for that watch, this is something to maybe consider. I'm not somebody that's going to recommend usually going for an alternative to the real thing. Rolex has created some different realities because of their availability that I think it becomes more of a likely scenario for some. So I think that's another point. And I do think 39mm is a good size because it's not really moving so far away from those that did like the 41mm size, but also kind of gets back to the original size without getting so far into that direction where this is going to size people out that did like that 41mm case size. It's a nice way of splitting the difference. And in terms of the new bracelet, I think it's a nice upgrade. I don't mind the riveted bracelet at all, so I know some just absolutely detest it. I was not one of those people, but there's no question the T-Fit clasp is wonderful to use. I think this is a class-leading clasp for under $5,000, and this one is priced around $3,000, so I think that goes to show how well positioned this one is. Now, if I had to say who this watch is going to be best suited for, I would say it's three camps. If you are somebody that's just looking for a do-it-all first luxury watch, I think this has to be on a short list. If you are somebody that maybe doesn't like the dive-oriented nature of many luxury watches that sit between this $3,000 to $5,000 range, looking at the Tudor Black Bay as an example, Omega and their offerings, I think that's where this watch makes a ton of sense. You're getting maximum versatility, you're getting something that's gonna pretty much work in almost every scenario, and it comes in a good package and I think is reasonably priced, and also getting into that MT family of movements, COSC certified. It gives you a lot of those check off the boxes type of ideas that you'd want for your first luxury watch. So I think that's one camp that I would certainly just recommend this watch for. And then also I think the two others are of course going to be ones that maybe long for the days of the 1016 Explorer and want something that has a similar approach and style but want some modern specifications to go along with it. I would say that is another camp of individuals I think that would really like this. You like those vintage style Explorer models and you just want something that actually has some modern wearability and factors going for it. that is where I would also say this makes some sense. And then finally, if you were a fan of the 214-270 39mm case Explorer and want something that is a nice alternative to that, I hate to bring up Rolex in this, but I think that is a reality for some where this will make some sense to take a look at. But I think this watch stands on its own as just being a cool watch. It's well positioned for $3,000. People were kind of on the fence of what to think of this watch, which I thought was kind of weird because I am all for new models outside of the Black Bay collection being focused by Tudor, and the Ranger was one I always enjoyed, and it's great to see that it's getting some just new life in 2022, and I think they did a nice job with this new release. But all right guys, that is my take on the new Tudor Ranger. If you found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Have you been able to handle this watch in person? What is your take? Now that the dust has settled a bit, now the watches are out at retailers, many people have been able to try these on and see them in person. Do you like this watch? Do you not like this watch? Please leave comments down below. Love to see that. And I think that'd be helpful for other people to kind of form their opinions on what they ultimately think of the Ranger. Also, definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you all very soon.